A young woman was found dead inside her own car on the side of a quiet rural road, just as Halloween morning began to break. And at first glance, nothing about the scene made sense. As investigators began retracing the final hours of her life, a grim reality slowly came into focus. Step by step, evidence revealed a chain of events driven by obsession, control, and rage, one that would leave an entire Texas community reeling. This is the heartbreaking story of Levy E. Lewis. Levy E. Lewis was born on October 4, 2001. She was more than a bright student or a familiar face in Hemphill. She was a spark that touched everyone who met her, a presence that seemed to lift the ordinary into something memorable. Born into the Choctaw Apache tribe of Eborb, she carried her heritage with pride, embracing the traditions of her family while balancing the modern rhythms of teenage life. Even as a child, she demonstrated an insatiable curiosity, a love for learning that went beyond textbooks. Her bedroom shelves overflowed with notebooks and science kits, each pageant project a small window into a mind eager to understand the world. By middle school, she was already volunteering at local community events, tutoring younger students, and helping organize tribal ceremonies. Kindness came naturally to her. She didn't just participate, she led, often quietly, ensuring others felt seen, appreciated, and safe. At Hemphill High School, Levy's achievements stacked almost effortlessly. She was consistently on the honor roll, excelling in biology and chemistry, and teachers marveled at her focus and initiative. But it was not just academics that set her apart. She was a friend who remembered birthdays, sent encouraging notes, and offered a listening ear to anyone in need. Her peers often described her as courageous, grounded, and thoughtful, qualities that made her the anchor of her friend group. She loved small adventures, trips to the local lake, stargazing with cousins, and long drives with her playlist humming softly in the background. Every detail of her life radiated a combination of discipline and warmth, of brilliance tempered by humility. By the time she reached her final year of high school, Levy had begun to look toward the future with precision. She dreamed of becoming a physician's assistant, dedicating her intelligence and compassion to the service of others. Her college applications reflected her doctor leadership roles, volunteer experience, extracurricular awards, and heartfelt essays. Teachers and mentors spoke of her not just as a student, but as someone who could change lives with quiet persistence. Even in moments of fatigue or stress, she maintained a calm optimism. Every success, every act of generosity, built a portrait of a young woman whose life seemed destined for great things. And yet, beneath all the achievements, beneath the accolades and the plans, she carried the normal vulnerabilities of any teenager friendships that demanded trust, feelings that could be complicated, emotions that could surge unexpectedly. She was human, wholly and beautifully human, a combination of brilliance, warmth, and potential. By the evening of October 30th, 2020, Hemphill felt different. Halloween weekend always carried a certain looseness in small towns. Routines softened, curfews stretched, and the quiet streets felt temporarily alive with possibility. For Levy E. Lewis, the night began simply. There was no sense of danger, no premonition that anything was wrong. She was not planning anything reckless or dramatic. Like most nights, she intended to spend time with people she trusted, in places she knew well. The kind of night that blended into memory without leaving a mark. Earlier that evening, Levy had been at home, her phone lighting up with messages from friends. A small party was happening at a house just outside town. Nothing wild, just music, familiar faces, laughter drifting through open doors. Levy didn't rush. She changed clothes carefully, checked her makeup in the mirror, and paused to send a quick text letting her family know where she'd be. It was a habit she'd formed over years, one rooted in respect and reassurance. She didn't sneak out. She didn't disappear. She left the way she always did, openly, responsibly, with the expectation that she'd be home later. By the time she arrived at the party, the atmosphere was relaxed. Friends greeted her warmly. Music played low enough for conversations to flow. Outside, trucks lined the gravel drive, their engines ticking softly as they cooled. Levy moved easily through the space, laughing, checking in with people, leaning into the familiarity of it all. Among those present was Montana Bacchil, the ex-wife of Matthew Edgar. The two women had formed an unlikely friendship in the months leading up to that night, one born from shared honesty rather than resentment. They stood together, talked together, and, most importantly, ignored the man who hovered at the edge of the gathering. Levy planned to leave the party quietly, in order to return home. It was a reasonable decision, a safe decision, or at least, it should have been. Sometime after midnight, Levy walked out to her car. The air was cool, the kind that settles into your bones without warning. She climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away, heading towards her parents' house. On her way home, that was where she was shot on the neck. Not long after, someone saw Levy's car parked weirdly by the roadside. The doors were opened. At first glance, the person thought she was drunk, then later realized that Levy Lewis had been shot dead as she slumped forward over the steering wheel. Immediately, the emergency services were called. When first responders arrived, they found Levy exactly where the night had left her, slumped over the wheel, blood visible inside the vehicle, the wound already fatal. There were no signs of life. The scene was secured. Flashing lights painted the trees red and blue, illuminating a crime that had unfolded almost invisibly. Back in town, Levy's family slept, unaware that their daughter had not come home. Her phone lay silent. No missed calls, no final message, just an absence that would soon become unbearable. By the time dawn began to lift the darkness from the road, the truth had already settled into place. Levy Lewis was gone, and with her death, a quiet Texas town crossed a line it could never uncross. Dispatch received a report of a vehicle stopped along a rural stretch outside town, its engine still running. At first, there was nothing to suggest the gravity of what waited there. Cars broke down on these roads all the time. People pulled over to argue, to cool off, to make phone calls. But when deputies arrived and approached the silver sedan, the situation shifted instantly from routine to irreversible. Inside the car sat Levy Lewis. She was slumped forward over the steering wheel, her long hair partially obscuring her face. At a glance, it looked as if she might be unconscious. But closer inspection told a different story. Blood had pooled along the interior of the vehicle. A dark stain marked her clothing, and at the base of her neck was a wound so catastrophic that there was no doubt about the outcome. Levy was pronounced dead at the scene. The stillness was overwhelming. The only sounds were the faint hum of the engine and the distant crackle of police radios as deputies began calling for backup. Flashing lights illuminated the trees, the road, the dew-covered grass. In a town as small as Hemphill, moments like this ripple outward quickly. Word doesn't travel fast at first, it seeps. Officer to dispatcher, dispatcher to supervisor, supervisor to investigators. And slowly, the reality sets in. A 19-year-old young woman had been murdered. Investigators began documenting the scene with methodical precision. Photographs were taken from every angle. Measurements were logged. The interior of the car was examined inch by inch. There were no signs of forced entry. The doors were locked. Her phone was not in her hand. A faint smear on the windshield was later identified as blood. The trajectory of the wound suggested a shot fired from outside the vehicle, through the open window. One shot, one moment, one irreversible act. Not far from the car, in the grass along the roadside, officers found a rifle. It was partially concealed, as if dropped hastily rather than placed with care. The weapon was secured and tagged, immediately raising the stakes of the investigation. This was no accident. This was a homicide involving a firearm, committed in a matter of seconds, then abandoned in the dark. As the sun began to rise, investigators worked against time. Tire tracks near the scene indicated that another vehicle had been present. The impressions were fresh, cutting cleanly through the damp soil. They led away from the road and disappeared, offering the first hint that the person responsible had fled quickly and deliberately. Every detail mattered now. Every footprint, every fragment. Back at the station, detectives began the grim process of identifying the victim and notifying her family. Levy's name was confirmed through her driver's license. Her address was located, and with that, the weight of the case shifted from evidence to people, from procedure to grief. The knock on the door came far too early in the morning. For Levy's family, it was a sound that would echo for the rest of their lives. There are no words that prepare parents for that moment. No phrasing that softens the blow. Officers spoke carefully, professionally, but the message was devastatingly simple. Their daughter was gone. She had been killed, and there were questions that could not yet be answered. As the news spread, shock rippled through the community. Hemphill was not a place accustomed to violence of this scale. People knew Levy. They had watched her grow up. She was a cashier at the local store, a volunteer, a student with plans that stretched far beyond the town limits. Her death felt personal, even to those who only knew her in passing. By mid-morning, investigators had begun piecing together the final hours of her life. They traced her movements backward, starting at the crime scene and working toward the party. Witnesses were contacted. Statements were collected. Slowly, a picture began to form. Not yet clear, but no longer empty. Several partygoers confirmed seeing Levy earlier that night. They described an argument, a man who was angry, a presence that disrupted the mood. They named him quickly, Matthew Edgar. Detectives noted the consistency in the descriptions. The agitation, the drinking, the confrontation. It was not enough to make an arrest, but it was enough to give the investigation direction. And then there was the text message. At 3:34 a.m., before police had arrived at the scene, Matthew Edgar had sent a message to Montana Bockel. When investigators recovered the phone records, a single word stood out starkly against the timeline: dead. It was sent in response to a simple question: where is Levy? The implications were chilling. How could he know? Why would he say it? And what did it mean that this message existed before the body was officially discovered? As detectives reviewed the data, another detail emerged. Matthew Edgar had been admitted to the hospital around the same time. He claimed he had been assaulted, that he didn't remember much of the night, that he was confused, disoriented, intoxicated. But confusion does not send texts, and intoxication does not explain knowledge that had not yet been made public. Officers went to the hospital. They spoke with him carefully, observed him closely, and what they saw raised even more questions. Matthew had blood on his pants, a small amount, but visible. He had blood on his face as well, blood that did not match any injuries on his own body. Samples were collected. clothing was seized. His statements were noted. Inconsistencies and all. He spoke of blackouts, of gaps in memory, of waking up without understanding how he had gotten there. But digital evidence told a different story. His phone showed movement, texts sent, actions taken with intention. By the end of the first day, investigators were no longer asking whether Levy E. Lewis had been murdered. That question had been answered on the roadside. Now they were asking something far more specific. Who had followed her into the dark? Who had stood beside her car? And who had pulled the trigger? As the evidence mounted in, the timeline tightened. The case shifted from tragedy to pursuit, because somewhere nearby, the person responsible for Levy's death was not just known by name but still walking free. And the truth, step by step, was beginning to close in. By the second day of the investigation, the quiet grief that had settled over Hemphill was joined by something sharper than fear. A young woman had been murdered on a roadside, and the person responsible had not yet been arrested. Parents kept their children closer. Doors were locked earlier than usual. Conversations in grocery store aisles dropped to whispers when the subject came up. The question everyone asked was the same one investigators were now racing to answer: how far back did this violence begin? Detectives returned to the crime scene in daylight, walking the stretch of road again and again. In the morning light, details emerged that the darkness had concealed. The tire impressions were clearer now, showing a distinct tread pattern that suggested a pickup truck had pulled off suddenly, then accelerated away. Grass near the shoulder was flattened, bent under the weight of hurried footsteps. This was not a random stop. This was an encounter that had unfolded quickly, undeliberately. The rifle recovered near the scene was sent to the lab for ballistic testing. Technicians examined it carefully, noting its condition and the absence of visible fingerprints. The lack of prints was not unusual. Smooth metal surfaces and outdoor exposure often erased trace evidence, but it added another layer of complexity. Still, investigators were confident. Firearms leave signatures that can't be wiped away. Microscopic markings etched into bullets act like fingerprints of their own. Inside Levy's car, forensic analysts focused on the interior. Blood spatter patterns confirmed what investigators already suspected: the shot had come from outside the vehicle, entering through the open driver's side window. There was no evidence of a struggle inside the car, no signs that Levy had tried to flee. Everything pointed to a sudden confrontation, one that escalated to lethal force almost instantly. Meanwhile, detectives began building a comprehensive timeline of Levy's final hours. Phone records were pulled, text messages were logged, social media activity was reviewed minute by minute. Her last known movements placed her at the party just hours before her death. Witnesses described her demeanor as calm, normal, unafraid. That detail mattered. It suggested she had no reason to believe she was in danger when she left. But then came the contradictions. Several witnesses independently described the behavior of Montana's ex-husband, Matthew Edgar, that night using the same words: angry, drunk, and unstable. One person recalled him pacing outside, clenching his jaw, watching Levy from a distance. Another remembered the sound of metal being struck, the sharp crack of a fist against a car door. Montana Bach L's vehicle bore the evidence: dents, scuffs, marks that aligned perfectly with the accounts. Montana herself became a key witness. Her statements were calm, consistent, and backed by physical evidence. She described Matthew's fixation on Levy, his resentment toward both women, and the tension that had followed him into the party. Importantly, she explained something investigators found striking: she and Levy were deliberately ignoring him. They were standing together, talking, laughing, refusing to engage. to someone like Matthew. That rejection was not just emotional, it was contestable. Detectives also began unraveling the deeper history between Matthew and Levy. What emerged was not a brief, harmless romance, but a complicated and increasingly troubling relationship. Matthew had been married when he first became involved with Levy. He was older, he had children, and while Levy eventually tried to distance herself from the situation, at one point explicitly stating she didn't want to be a homewrecker, the connection never fully dissolved. Text messages revealed cycles of reconciliation and rupture. Apologies followed by accusations. Affection followed by control. In several messages, Levy described physical abuse. She told a cousin her body hurt after fights. She questioned why Matthew kept putting his hands on her. These were not isolated remarks. They formed a pattern, one that investigators recognized all too well. Still, the case did not hinge on emotion or history alone. It hinged on proof. At the hospital, forensic technicians processed Matthew Edgar's clothing. When the results came back, they were devastating. A tiny drop of blood found on his pants was tested and confirmed to belong to Levy Lewis. The amount was small, almost insignificant to the naked eye. But in court, it would speak volumes. Blood does not transfer without proximity. And proximity, in this case, placed Matthew exactly where he claimed he couldn't remember being. Even more troubling was the blood found on Matthew's face. Investigators noted that he had no visible injuries that could explain it. The DNA did not match him, and it did not match Levy. The source remained unidentified, raising new questions. Had there been another confrontation? Another victim? Or had Matthew been injured in the chaos he refused to acknowledge? Digital evidence continued to undermine his claims of blackout. His phone showed movement consistent with driving, messages sent with clear intent, calls placed and received. This was not someone drifting in and out of consciousness. This was someone making decisions. And then there was the rifle. Ballistics testing confirmed that the bullet fragment recovered from inside Levy's car matched the rifle found near the scene. The match was conclusive. The weapon that killed her had been recovered, and it had been discarded in haste, not hidden with care. With each new piece of evidence, the investigation tightened its focus. But detectives moved carefully. In small towns, rushed arrests can unravel cases. Every step had to be deliberate. Every claim had to be supported. They re-interviewed witnesses, cross-checked timelines, verified locations. Meanwhile, the community mourned. A vigil was held. Candles flickered beneath a dark sky as friends, family, and strangers gathered to remember Levy. Her name was spoken aloud again and again, as if repetition could keep her present. Photos of her smiling face circulated online, accompanied by disbelief and anger. How could this happen here? How could this happen to her? As investigators prepared their case, one thing became increasingly clear. This was not a crime of passion in the moment alone. It was the final act of a longer story, one shaped by obsession, entitlement, and rage that had been building for months. And as the evidence stack grew taller, the window for Matthew Edgar to explain himself grew smaller, because the investigation would cross a threshold from gathering facts to naming a killer. By this point, investigators were no longer searching broadly. The focus had narrowed. The question was no longer who could have done this, but how much could be proven. Detectives began by reconstructing the final movements of both vehicles with precision. Phone pings placed Matthew Edgar's truck on the same rural roads Levy had traveled after leaving the party. The timestamps aligned too closely to be coincidence. His phone moved when hers moved. When hers stopped, his stopped too. and when hers never moved again, his suddenly reappeared miles away. The road itself had become a silent witness, confirming what no one had seen. Investigators re-interviewed witnesses from the party, this time with timelines in hand. What had once been emotional recollections became anchored to exact minutes. Who saw Matthew leave? Who saw Levy drive away? Who noticed the sudden absence of both vehicles? One witness recalled Matthew storming out just moments after Levy, his anger no longer contained. Another remembered the sound of his truck accelerating sharply into the night. These were no longer impressions. They were data points. Then came the forensic confirmation that sealed the trajectory of the case. The ballistic report was finalized. The rifle recovered in the grass near the crime scene was conclusively matched to the bullet fragment taken from Levy's vehicle. The markings were identical. There was no margin for doubt. This was the weapon, and it had been discarded within steps of where Levy died, as if its owner had been desperate to create distance between himself and what he had just done. At the same time, the lab results from Matthew Edgar's clothing were returned in full. The drop of Levy's blood on his pants was no longer a preliminary finding. It was a confirmed DNA match. Investigators revisited his earlier statements, where he claimed he never went near her car. The contradiction was glaring. Blood does not travel on its own. It is carried by contact. And contact, in this case, meant proximity at the exact moment Levy was bleeding. Still, detectives pushed further. They examined Matthew's phone records again, this time focusing on deleted messages and data usage. Though much had been erased, fragments remained, enough to show intent, enough to show awareness, enough to prove that his mind had been functioning clearly enough to respond with that single, devastating word dead. That text message became a turning point. Investigators mapped it against the timeline again and again. It was sent before first responders arrived, before Levy's death was officially confirmed, before anyone outside law enforcement could have known. The implication was chilling and unavoidable. Matthew knew because Matthew had seen. As pressure mounted, another twist emerged, one that briefly threatened to complicate the narrative. Some investigators questioned whether Montana Backel could have been involved. The theory was uncomfortable but necessary. Her car had been damaged. She had been at the party. Her name appeared in the digital trail. But unlike Matthew, her movements did not align with the crime scene. Her phone placed her elsewhere. Her statements remained consistent. And crucially, there was no forensic evidence tying her to Levy's death. The theory collapsed under scrutiny. With that, the investigation snapped back into sharp focus. Matthew Edgar was arrested and charged with the murder of Levy E. Lewis. The arrest did not bring immediate relief. Instead, it introduced a new phase, one defined by legal maneuvering, public outrage, and a defense that seemed as fractured as the man behind it. When the case against Matthew Edgar finally reached the courtroom, it carried the weight of months of grief, anger, and unanswered questions. By then, the evidence was substantial. The narrative prosecutors intended to present was clear, chronological, and supported by forensics, digital data, and witness testimony. For Levy's family, this was supposed to be the moment when the chaos began to settle into order, when truth would be spoken out loud, under oath, and justice would finally move forward. But Matthew Edgar had other plans. Out on bond as the trial began, he was required to wear an ankle monitor, an electronic tether meant to ensure he stayed within reach of the court. For a short time, it appeared to work. He showed up. He sat at the defense table. He listened as opening statements outlined the night Levy died, the road where she was found, and the evidence that tied him to her final moments. He watched as jurors absorbed the story piece by piece. Then, After the second day of testimony, Matthew disappeared. Sometime during the night, the battery on his ankle monitor was allowed to drain completely. There was no struggle, no dramatic escape, just a quiet decision to step away from the rules and vanish. By morning, authorities realized what had happened. The man accused of murdering a 19-year-old woman had fled. The reaction was immediate and furious. Law enforcement agencies expanded the search. Alerts were issued. Roadways were checked. Tips poured in from surrounding counties. For Levy's family, the news was devastating. Not just because justice had been delayed, but because the man responsible for her death was once again out in the world, unaccounted for. Despite his absence, the court made a critical decision. The trial would continue. Jurors returned to their seats as prosecutors laid out the case in full. They heard about the party, the argument, the pursuit down our cruel roads. They examined photographs of the crime scene and listened as forensic experts explained blood transfer, ballistic matches, and phone data. They heard Montana Bakil's testimony. Study, detailed, unshaken under cross-examination. They saw the text message displayed on a screen in the courtroom did. Matthew's defense team argued blackout and intoxication. They suggested uncertainty, gaps, confusion. But without their client present to reinforce those claims, the arguments rang hollow. Evidence does not forget, and it does not flee. Outside the courtroom, the manhunt intensified. Investigators followed leads across Texas. Some tips were credible, others evaporated under scrutiny. Months passed, seasons changed, and still, Matthew Edgar remained hidden. Behind the scenes, another disturbing truth began to surface. Authorities learned that Matthew had not acted entirely alone during his time on the run. When U.S. Marshals finally closed in on him nearly 11 months later, they found him hiding in a house owned by a family friend, just yards away from his grandparents' property. Close enough to familiarity, close enough to comfort, close enough to suggest help. Matthew's mother, Cindy Hogan, was present when he was captured. Investigators would later determine that she had played a role in assisting him while he evaded law enforcement. The revelation added another layer to an already complex case of family dynamic that had prioritized protection over accountability. Cindy Hogan was charged with hindering apprehension. When Matthew Edgar was finally brought back into custody in December of 2022, there was no dramatic standoff, no chase through the woods, just the quiet end of a long evasion. He was thin, tired, and out of places to run. By that point, the jury had already reached its verdict. Matthew Edgar was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to 99 years in prison, a term that reflected both the severity of the crime and the court's rejection of his attempts to escape responsibility. Under Texas law, he would not be eligible for parole for decades. The sentence did not bring Levy back. Nothing could, but it drew a firm line between what he had taken and what he would now lose. For Levy's family, the verdict brought a complicated kind of closure. Relief, yes, but also exhaustion. Justice had been delayed, disrupted, and tested, but it had not been denied. And yet, as the courtroom emptied and the headlines faded, one final chapter remained. Not about the man who killed Levy E. Lewis, but about the life he failed to erase. A young woman with plans, discipline, and compassion crossed paths with someone who believed control was the same as love, and possession was the same as connection. That misunderstanding proved fatal. Levy E. Lewis would never come home. No prison wall could change that. What remains instead is reflection. Reflection on how quietly danger can grow inside relationships that appear complicated but familiar. Reflection on how warning signs, Anger, jealousy, control, violence are often minimized until it is too late, and reflection on how communities, especially small ones, struggle to reconcile the people they think they know with the acts those people are capable of committing. For Levy's family, life continues in fragments. Holidays are different. Milestones arrive with an absence that can't be ignored. But so does resolve. Resolve to speak her name. Resolve to protect others. Resolve to ensure that Levy's story is not reduced to a headline or a statistic, but remembered as a life that deserved far more time than it was given. For Hemphill, the case left a permanent imprint. It changed how people lock their doors, how parents talk to their children, how conversations about relationships are framed. The town did not forget Levy Lewis, and it never will. Her story became part of its collective memory, a quiet reminder that even in places where everyone knows everyone, darkness can still find a way in. And for those hearing this story now, perhaps far from Texas, far from that road, there is one unavoidable truth: cases like this are never just about one person. They are about patterns, about choices, about moments when intervention could have altered the outcome. Levy did many things right. She was responsible. She was honest. She tried to disengage. And still, violence followed her. That reality demands attention, not judgment. Matthew Edgar will spend most of his life behind bars, his freedom reduced to concrete walls uncounted days. But prison is not the true ending of this story. The true ending lies in the scholarship that carries Levy's name, in the conversation sparked by her death, in the lives that may yet be saved because someone recognizes the signs sooner. Levy Lewis was not just a victim. She was a daughter, a student, a friend, a young woman with a future that should have unfolded naturally. Instead, her story became a warning and a responsibility. And if there's one lasting question this case leaves behind, it is this: how many tragedies could be prevented if we listened sooner and believed people the first time they said they were being hurt? Stories like Levy's matter, not for sensationalism, but for awareness, remembrance, and change. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really means a lot and helps keep these stories coming. See you in the next one.